you, Karen. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. It's great to see you all today. Just a quick announcement about our upcoming speakers for the summer. So we are going to have renowned journalist Andrea Bernstein joining us on June 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern. So please check your inboxes, check your communications. If you don't know who she is, she used to work for WCNY. She's a fantastic journalist, and we're excited to have her. So stay tuned for more details on that. And then just a quick word, in case you are new to Big Tent, over the past week or so, we've been working with a grassroots organization in West Virginia on a very important letter writing campaign that we're doing. The letters are really well written. They're going to West Virginia voters, urging them to call Senator Joe Manchin's office, asking him to vote yes on the major voting rights bill, HR 1 S1, the For the People Act. And this is a really important letter writing campaign because we know that Joe Manchin is on the fence and he is a critical vote in the Senate to help get it passed. Leader Chuck Schumer is bringing this bill up for a vote in the Senate the week of June 20th. So it will be really important to get letters out within the next 5 to 7 days if possible. We also know from our organizer in West Virginia that phone calls to Manchin's office by his constituents are really effective in moving him on issues. So if he gets 30 to 50 calls a day to his office, that's a really big deal. So now on to the process. So the letters and names, addresses are very easy to request. We are sending them in batches of 20. If you would like letters in the chat box here, you can send me your full name, email address, and how many letters you would like in quantities of 20. Or you can email me separately at info@bigtentusa.org, and I will put that in the chat so you don't have to scribble that down. You will also then receive, so once you request your letters, you'll receive a PDF document of 20 letters with instructions and a separate document with names and addresses. It's very, very easy. The letters are the same style as Vote Forward. So if you're familiar with that, it's super easy. You just print, write in the voter first name, a very short note, sign, address your envelope, and mail them out. So this is a great, really important campaign, and we hope that you'll join us in it.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. So yeah, I'll second all that. The letter writing has been a real staple of the Big Tent USA efforts, and we've had a lot of positive feedback from Vote Forward and the different organizations we've worked with. So we like to think that we've made a difference, and you can all be a part of that. So put it in the chat if you want some letters coming your way. Vanessa will send them to you. Okay, well, it is time to introduce you to today's speakers, and I'm very, very happy to welcome Louis Cohen and Brett Healy, who are with an organization which is called 4 Directions. And I grew up in the West with Native American peoples, and some of them they were people dislocated from their home communities who went to school with me, and I grew up with them. They were my friends, they were my classmates. And all my life, I've really been concerned about this topic. This is something that just plagues me, that the Native American people have not had full voting rights in our country. And this organization is doing really important work to change that situation. And I'm so proud of what they've done, and I'm so proud to have them here with us today. Now, I'll tell you about these 2 men who are part of this organization. Louis Cohen, who spoke once to us live, way back in the ancient days before the pandemic. And I'll tell you a little bit about Louis. He's probably on your screen. You can see him there. He started in finance and is from New York City. One fun fact is he was a chess prodigy in his youth. I like that, Louis. That's very interesting. You want to outwit these people who are the
Karen, I think Lincoln went to the theater when that was going on, but that's besides the point. That was a couple of years ago.
Okay, I know you were a youth chess competitor, but very impressive. You have worked for Democratic campaigns in New York for quite a while, and in 2019, you became the finance director of 4 Directions. And we met you through Carolyn Weiner, who is one of our wonderful Big Tent members and a founder of Big Tent. And so I'm going to let you take it. First, I'm going to introduce Brett as well. Brett is on the phone because he is in the middle of South Dakota driving around in a car, doing the good work. He is the Chief Operating Officer of 4 Directions, and one of the founders. He is a government affairs expert and has been part of the South Dakota Democratic Party and has worked in South Dakota politics during his career, and including the Rosebud Economic Development Corp. I thought that was interesting. And he's now working on Native American voting programs. And there's some interesting facts, but I think I'll let these guys speak for themselves about that. So thank you, Louis. Thank you, Brett. And Louis, why don't you take it away?
Well, thank you, Karen, and good afternoon, everyone. It is very, very nice to be here, and I want to thank all the Big Ten folks for the amazing work that you guys do. I've been looking into that in terms of letter writing and advocacy and the activism that you folks do. To get stuff done in politics these days, it has to be a team effort. It has to be a lot of folks getting together and saying, you know what, things have to change. We're not on the right path there. Things have to be different. And now more so than ever. We had that situation in 2020. Folks came out, everyone did the right thing. Folks registered to vote. Folks actually turned out to vote en masse. Now it's 2022. It's a different year. It's a different cycle. It's a different priority right now. Having said that, the work that you folks do is essential. So thank you very much for doing so. And it's a real pleasure for Brett and I to be here. I'll let Brett speak for himself, but I'm sure that it is, to join you folks this morning. And thank you for having us. Yes, I initially did speak to some of the folks that are active in Big Tech back in March of 2020 at Carolyn Wiener's home, who I've been interacting with for a couple of years. And when Karen offered me the opportunity to come and speak via Zoom, I thought that was, wow, that's terrific, and I really appreciate the invitation. What Four Directions basically does, we are the largest advocacy group when it comes to Native American voting, period. That's on a national basis. The organization has been around since 2003. The co-executive directors, who are Oj and Barb Siemens, who are Rosebud Sioux, by the way, they are from Mission, South Dakota. They formed the organization back in 2003 because there was a need. There was something missing. And what was missing was natives. They have gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to a lot of areas, a lot of respects, but voting is certainly one of them, and that continues to be the case to this day. And they said, you know, we have to do something. We have to fill the gap. We have to fill the need. And they formed Four Directions. They have a lot of contacts when it comes to tribal leaders and tribal elders from across the country. And their whole family got involved. Their daughter Donna is involved in organizing. And 18 years later, Four Directions is the preeminent force when it comes to Native American voting. We're very proud of that, without question. The Native vote actually made more of a difference in 2020 than I believe it has in many, many years, if not ever. And a lot of things happened in 2020, which were important. Number one, we had a record Native turnout in 5 key battleground states. Now, we were focusing our energies in 2020 on turning out the Native vote in 5 states. They were Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Colorado, and Arizona. Now, why those states? Those states for several reasons. Number one, because there are large populations of unregistered, or were large populations of unregistered natives in those states of voting age that needed to be registered. That's the way it works. You need to register, obviously, before you can vote. Number two, large amounts of natives that were registered that don't vote. It's a whole different metric, and you have to approach that in a different way. You're registered, you don't vote. Why? Let's get to the bottom of that. And number three, those states were pivotal. They were swing states, they were battleground states. And I think it's unequivocal that the Biden-Harris ticket wouldn't have been elected or had the success that it's had if those 5 states had not gone blue. We can do the math. Clearly, there's no question about that. Now, natives vote overwhelmingly for a Democrat when, in fact, they do turn out to vote. They're not unlike African-American women, for instance, another very fiercely loyal Democratic voting bloc. We focus on this voting bloc because specifically it is a bloc that has been ignored or suppressed or has had their vote disenfranchised for many, many years. So we turned out the vote in those 5 states. In fact, we did such a good job in Arizona that former Labor Secretary Robert Reich came out with a tweet 4 days after the election. The date was November 7th, Saturday, thanking the Navajo Nation for its patriotic work in turning out during a pandemic, to turn out to vote and helping to flip Arizona, now one state, from red to blue, being true patriots, and we appreciated the tweet. Now, we're the ones that were working there, so obviously we turned out the vote, in our own way as best that we could. Our way of turning out the vote is a myriad set of things that we do, which were more complicated clearly in the year 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is something obviously new. What we do is we target folks and register them to vote. That's the first thing, because obviously you can't vote if you're not registered. That's number one. Number two, once you are registered, there has to be a game plan. Okay, you're registered. Now, how are you going to vote? Are you going to vote by mail? Are you going to vote absentee? Are you going to vote in person? Are you going to vote early if you're voting in person? Or are you going to vote on the same day? What is the game plan? Just saying I'm going to vote and I'm registered, that's not an answer, and that's not that doesn't get the job done. That's like making a reservation at the restaurant, not showing up. You actually have to show up and sit down and eat dinner. You have to show up and vote. And we try to make it as easy as possible to get the job done. So registering folks to vote is only part A. Part B is devising a strategy that they will stick with. Natives know they've been disenfranchised for years, and they're sensitive about being turned away at the ballot box, about being disenfranchised, and it's sort of an intimidating process, if you will. In addition, if you're on a reservation, you probably do not have a voting booth, a voting place across the street or down the block. It is a trek. It is a voyage to get there and back, which is one of the reasons that this voter suppression stuff that's sweeping the country is as insidious as it is, because they're just making it harder for folks who have a hard time voting anyway to vote. And it's not just targeting what they're doing now. It's clearly not just targeting Native Americans. That's obvious. They're targeting minorities in general, for a very simple reason. They didn't like the way the vote went in November. They certainly didn't like the way it went in January. And as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to bolster our voter base, we're going to register more folks to vote, we're going to come up with policies that they're going to get them turned out. No, that's not the way it works, because they don't have many ideas. What they're going to do is make it harder for folks that do want to vote, that are motivated, that want to have their vote counted. They're going to make it harder for them to vote, whether it's the Native American community, African American community, Latinx, etc. And we try to get in and mitigate that. Now, we did a good job in Georgia. After the election, we did some quick math. Obviously, all the senatorial marbles were in play in Georgia. And we determined that there were over 100,000 natives in Georgia, although there was no federal tribe there. There were 3 state-sponsored tribes. No federal tribe, meaning there was no reservation per se, if you will. So the native community was spread out across the vast state of Georgia. There were over 100,000 natives that were not registered to vote. So even though we had little capital at that point, because the election had ended, no one knew we were going into overtime or extra innings, and we didn't have any organization on the ground because we didn't prep. Normally, you need some prep time to make sure that you can get the job done and set the table. This is where Brett comes in. He's the table setter, if you will. We went down there anyway, and over a period of, basically asking email solicitations on a daily basis for 6 weeks, we went down on a shoestring budget, and our supporters, who are incredible on a coast-to-coast basis, came up with the capital for us to stay there for 6.5 weeks. We registered over 13,000 natives to vote, of whom 73% actually turned out to vote on January 5th. And I mean either that day or early voting, or they voted by mail or whatever it was, but they cast a ballot, 73%, which was the highest of any demographic group that voted on January 5th. The Caucasian demographic was second. They turned out 67% of Caucasians who were of voting age and registered turned out to vote in Georgia. African Americans were number 3 in the mid-50s. So we were pleased with that turnout as well. That is what we did over the last 2 years. And mind you, we did this during a pandemic. The way we tend to work is in-person contact, if you will, because it's easier. Natives tend to work better by interacting with one another. What we do is we hire natives, either full-time or part-time, from the state that we're focused on. I gave you the list of those 5 states. We hired natives full-time and part-time in those states, and they were helping to register people to vote and helping to do all the things. In a normal environment, we would even go as far as to say, well, okay, you're registered. What's your plan to vote? Are you going to vote in person on the day of election? How are you going to get there? We don't know how we're going to get there. Bad answer. We're going to try to arrange transportation. That was more complicated, clearly, in a pandemic, because you couldn't put 6 people in a van for obvious reasons. That became more complicated, but we still endeavored to do that as well, because you have to finish. I always tell my kids, if you start something, finish it. And the end game is not getting them registered. The end game is actually getting them to cast a vote. Now, one very important, I'm asked this all the time. Natives vote overwhelmingly Democrat. Do you steer them in that direction? And we certainly do not in any way, shape, or form, because Four Directions is a nonpartisan 501c4 organization with a 501c pathway. We do not do that in any way, shape, or form. They are absolutely, positively not steered. They can vote for whomever they choose to vote for, because it is a free country. If they choose to vote for the Republican over here, God bless. They choose to vote for the Democrat over here, God bless. If there was a communist running on the communist line and they made a free choice to vote over there, that is in fact their right to do so, and they can do so. So that goes without saying. The fact that natives do vote in a very loyal democratic way is a statement all, by itself. And to be quite honest, when I was offered this position several years ago, if natives had turned out 95 to 97% for Republican voters, I would applaud their tenacity and their right to vote. I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you folks today, because that's not where I come from. Having said that, this is how they vote. Now, our states in 2022 are different. Some are the same, some are different, but the challenges in 2022 are much different than they were in 2020. In 2020, number one, you didn't have voter suppression sweeping the country. This is something new. You had pockets of it, of course, that's always been the case. Nothing new there. Now, come January 6th, 2/3 of the states have erupted. 3 or 4 states, including Texas and Florida, have actually signed bills into law saying, okay, here are restrictive voting laws, and we're changing it to make it harder for folks to vote. So we're dealing with this voter suppression stuff, number one. And number two, we don't have number 45 at the top of the ticket, who was a draw. Positive or negative, he was a draw. He drew folks on the Republican side, the conservative side, to get out and vote, and he certainly galvanized the Democratic vote. There's no question about it, because I heard folks saying, it's a pandemic, I don't care, I'm getting out there, it's rain, that's okay, it's raining, no problem with that, it's rain, it's hailing, that's no problem, man. I'm gonna get out and vote, because it was that urgent, and folks got the urgency. We don't have that sense of urgency in 2022, which kind of makes our job harder, because we have to convey the urgency of, okay, we have to have folks turn out because the House is in play, the Senate's in play, and if you believe in the policies put forth by the Biden administration, you can't have them derailed after 2 years. They have to continue. And with that being the case, it's a harder sell to get folks to get out and vote. But that is our job. Hard or not, we have to get them out to vote. Now, our states in 2022 are Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Georgia, we've added to the list. It was not part of our original 5 from 2020, because we did not get a chance to register over 80,000 native Georgians who we have to come back and register to vote. Georgia has become a swing state. Believe it or not, 2 years ago, it didn't appear to be in that category. It appeared to be solid red, deep south, etc. Well, the Biden-Harris ticket won the state, number one, and of course, we know what happened in January. Now, that state has to be defended because one of the 2 Senate seats is up for grabs. It's not a 6-year term, it's a 2-year term, and that's going to be up for grabs. Arizona, in addition, well, one of those seats is up for grabs as well, because if it's not a 6-year term, it's a 2-year term. Wisconsin, a lot of natives unregistered, a lot of natives don't vote. Important Senate potential flip there as well. So we make our determination in terms of where can we get the best bang for the buck, where can we utilize the capital, which is usually limited and restricted. So we have to make the most use for it, because it's not a business, but you also have to get the best bang for your buck. Registering as many natives as possible to vote in California or New York, albeit a good idea in an ideal environment where capital was not a restraint, it politically doesn't make a lot of sense for obvious reasons. California and New York are likely not to be in play in 2022, 2024, etc. We stay with battleground states where there's a large Native community that's out there that wants to get out and vote and that needs guidance. We provide the guidance. One of the reasons I took this job 2 years ago is because, and then I'll turn it over to Brett, we do good work. What I mean by that is we help people vote, which is important. We help folks vote who have been disenfranchised for a very long period of time. We help clear the field of uncertainty. We make it easier for them to get their ballots cast. In addition, we also do a lot of hiring. As I mentioned before, we hire part-time and full-time in states that we're working in. Natives need the work. They needed the work, especially in 2020, because I'm sure you folks know the Native American community was the hardest hit community in the country by COVID-19, whether it's the Navajo Nation or others. They were using the word decimated is not too strong a term. It was ugly, and they need the work. And we're all trying to come back from COVID-19, the natives as well, because they were really hit hard by that. So it's a win-win situation. We create jobs for folks that need the work, that are good at it, and the work they do helps people who are always disenfranchised over decades and centuries. It helps them to vote. With that being the case, I'm going to break and turn it over to Brett Healy if he's there. Brett?
I am, Lewis. Thank you.
You got it.
All right, so it looks like we're getting close to the bottom of the hour. I want to be cognizant of allowing some healthy Q&A, so I will just fill in from Lewis's fine introduction, give you a bit background, 4 directions from when it was formed and kind of the path we've taken. I happen to have run the South Dakota Democratic Party when Tim Johnson, who was my old boss before he moved me over to the party, back in 2002, won by a grand total of 524 votes, and it was clearly in South Dakota the Native American vote that had saved that U.S. Senate seat. No other reason he would have been able to survive his first reelect. That said, and I grew up in South Dakota, I was looking at it from a political operative standpoint, and then ended up partnering with Barb and Oj Siemens. And as you get drawn into this work, you start feeling the passion for folks that haven't had that fair shake that Lewis was talking about. And in fact, extraordinary challenges that face Native Americans, especially in rural reservation settings, but also in urban, sometimes isolated communities. So with that as a level set, 2004 happened to be another barn burner of a Senate race in South Dakota. Unfortunately, Senator Daschle narrowly lost his reelect in 2004. But in that cycle, we had at first operated as a nonprofit and had successfully gotten the Democratic candidate elected because she happened to have won 95% of the Native vote in a special congressional election in June of 2004. And then in the fall, we analyzed what we'd done in June, and what was missing is that we only really had 1 day in which to get the vote out. And though South Dakota had gone to no excuse absentee voting then, which in essence is early voting, we got creative and did some research, found that there would be nothing prohibiting providing funding for some county governments in order to provide a equal satellite voting location on the reservation. So long before Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook helped election jurisdictions provide money, we found some capital and then had to back channel it through the DOJ at the time, given that it was the Bush DOJ, but got satellite voting in-person offices on the Pine Ridge and Rosebud Indian reservations. And for every 100 voters that had cast a vote in 2000 during a presidential, we were on the order of 240 to 250 votes just 4 years later. The difference was an equal opportunity to cast a ballot for 6 weeks, or in the case of Pine Ridge for 3 weeks, and that we had a robust on-the-ground operation. Ever since we first started, we've been operating in what now is known as relational organizing. We hire folks that go to their family and the folks that they know. Nobody knows everybody, and there's a lot of people that need jobs in and certainly it's an opportunity to spread the wealth, if you will, of capital investments from the outside. And it does take that from the outside, because the other thing with that story from 2004, access isn't equal most of the time. And in fact, long before the current efforts by some to restrict voting, there'd been a pretty effective long-term voter suppression strategy when it came to Native people, especially across the West. And some of it was not accidental, but benign neglect. When states have made it easier to vote for the majority population, that means a lot of this early, no excuse absentee voting. Problem is the voting architectures with the county courthouse, and the county courthouse almost never is on a reservation unless the entire county is. And so we ended up from about that first, incentivizing, paying for the extra access, then became a fight in South Dakota, then became a fight in other states. We have started litigation and threatened litigation now in Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Nevada, Arizona, and we have yet, and then in fact, actually, we helped the Lower Muskogee Creek tribe line up counsel, and they are a co-plaintiff along with the Georgia NAACP, the Georgia League of Women Voters, on pushing back in the current Georgia law. So in addition to the registration and field operations that are easier to explain, we've actually, since about 2012, been in the voter equality game, fighting for equal access for voters. And in fact, after the 2018 election, we helped the Navajo Nation bring litigation against 3 counties to have equal access to in-person early voting. And then in 2020, working with individual Navajo plaintiffs, we worked to try to get equal access by eliminating the ballot receipt deadline of the physical ballot, and to make it equal, because the mail service on the Navajo reservation was greatly inferior to that of other places. Just one statistic, there is one postal mailing location per 15 square miles in Scottsdale, Arizona. On the Navajo reservation, it's 1 per 700 square miles. That's the difference between a stroll and running a couple of marathons if you don't have a vehicle, and the access to vehicles and money to put gas in cars just isn't nearly the same. So we ultimately were unable to process that lawsuit to completion, but in the back and forth, there ended up being a lot more drop boxes installed, and we are waiting to see what happens with John Roberts' court's decision on a case that originated in Arizona that a lot of Republican attorney generals, happens to be no Democrats on that brief, they asked for cert to the U.S. Supreme Court from a Ninth Circuit decision that had gone against what the Arizona attorney general thought ought to happen, and we're waiting to find out what that thing coming out of that court is. And here in June, worried about what it might do to the test for vote denial under Section 2, and that's where we've mostly lived our fights, is equal access to the actual physical architecture and infrastructure of voting. So that's one of the other things that we've done along the way. Lewis pointed out that in Georgia, that was the first time that we've been able to actually eclipse. We came close in North Dakota in 2018 to matching Caucasian turnout within 10% of. This time we actually outperformed. That's the broader view, and with that, I guess open it up to questions about what the strategy is going forward. The states Lewis mentioned, obviously Nevada is not safely blue, even though it's had a majority Democratic legislature since 2018, and some statewide offices since 2016, and kept the Harry Reid seat Democratic. We've been operating and helping the Nevada tribes ever since 2010. We've been involved in Arizona once in 2010, and then continued since 2018. And then through our efforts at broader messaging and engagement in 2020, or rather in 2019, we had the first ever Native American Presidential Candidate Forum in Sioux City, Iowa. and Vice President Harris participated via Zoom, even pre-pandemic at that location, along with Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, and others. And then via video and written commitment, President Biden actually participated at our Nevada Tribes and Four Directions Forum in Las Vegas, Nevada, in January of 2020. One last thing, we had good protocols in place, and certainly got a little bit lucky, but we stayed engaged in the door-to-door and traditional engagement, if you will, even in the face of that pandemic, in Arizona, in Minnesota, some in South Dakota, certainly in Georgia for the runoff, and in Nevada. We did not shy away from that. We put protocols in place with the folks we were working with to keep everybody safe. And knock on wood, we did not have a single incident of positive COVID test of any of our workers throughout that period. I think we got a little bit lucky with that, but it was an enormous challenge. But the lack of a voice is something that's permanent, and the Native leaders and Native workers that we worked with made a heck of a difference. And then lastly, this organization didn't come together without folks that aren't on the call today. Barb and Oj Siemens. Barb is in her early 70s. She worked for the Democratic Party campaign in 2002, so she was working for me indirectly, didn't know her directly. I was the executive director, and as you well know, you have a coordinated campaign and a coordinated campaign director and the like. And then Oj, her husband, also worked on that campaign. And then we got connected in 2003. We've become dear and deep friends, as well as my daughter, as well as their family. So it's, Lewis points out, we're a national organization. That may be inflating what the term national means. It's a few families and some good people like Lewis that get involved in this, and then a cast of hundreds, if not thousands, when we're actually out on the ground doing the work, hiring lots and lots of folks, and a cast of tens of thousands of fine people like you that help with the most important thing outside of time and commitment is, of course, some resources to be able to, at the end of the day, put gas in vehicles, pay people to drive their family, and at the end of the day, also, it ends up putting food on table. We don't buy a lot of even radio ads. Certainly don't buy any TV ads. Most everything that's spent in the field is spent on people and on logistics.
Karen, I think you're muted.
Thank you. That was so interesting. Thank you both.
If I could just jump in for 1 second. My mother always said it's better to be lucky than good. And Brett said, well, we were probably more lucky. Well, we probably were lucky to avoid any pandemic-related illness in the face of a hellacious situation. We were working in the heart of deep Arizona in the summer months, June, July, and August. I think everyone here remembers the extent of the spread of COVID-19 last summer. It was in Arizona. It was horrible, and we avoided anyone getting sick, thank goodness. So better lucky than good. If we were lucky, that's great. I happen to notice that there was a question, from Laura, what are your messages to get out the vote for the midterms for natives, I assume? And it's a very simple message. The message is keep the momentum going. Look what we achieved. Look what we achieved in 2020. Natives came out in record numbers in 5 states. They came out and voted across the board. That vote helped to elect a Democratic president and vice president, number one. It helped to elect a Democratic Senate, albeit by smoke and mirrors, by a very close margin in Georgia, number two. That vote, combined with the fact that we had a Native American Interior Secretary by the name of Deb Haaland. And this was something that we were very pleased about. We knew that she would be a great pick. Being Native notwithstanding, she'd be a great pick. But the symbolism involved of having Deb Haaland as Interior Secretary, the symbolism is striking. And you folks know what I'm talking about. I don't have to elaborate. It is striking. And it shows that Native American and the Native American community from coast to coast, First Americans have come a long way. Their vote counted in a big way in 2020. We have a representative who's a secretary of the Interior, and their vote is now being sought after and treasured for the next election. So a lot has happened. So the message would be, we've got the momentum, don't drop the ball. We had one good cycle, there's more work to be done. A lot of things can be reversed if, never mind the fact that natives need to vote because it's the right thing to do, and they got that. Natives want to vote. They want to vote desperately. They just don't want to have their vote trampled on, and they don't want to be disenfranchised. Keep the momentum going. It's an easier slog this time because we're more than likely we're not going to be dealing with COVID-19 in November of 20 and the months leading up to it as much as we were last year. We need to keep the momentum going and make the native vote even more important then than it is now. Thank you for the question.
Sure, just a very quick follow-up. Isn't that a partisan message? I'm just wondering whether, it's not that I think it's a bad message, but you say you're nonpartisan, and would that get you in trouble by saying?
No, it's a good question. It's not a partisan message to the extent that we want to keep the momentum going. The momentum is the native vote is now being sought after. The native vote made a difference. Whatever the results were, the native vote made a difference. There's no question about it. And they voted the way they voted. So there's no point in losing the momentum now when we've got the, you got to take the bull by the horn. You strike when the iron's hot. And the iron is hot right now. People want, the native vote is being sought after.
Thank you.
Perhaps a different way to put it is the native preferred candidates won in 2020. That's something worth keeping up. And, it's probably unlikely that the candidates that were native preferred in 2020 are not going to be the same, and those and their friends aren't going to be the same preferred candidates in 2022. But Lewis is not wrong in terms of the overall. It was pretty important. And just to underscore, Deb Haaland, who had been, as you likely know, a congresswoman in New Mexico, had actually been a state Democratic Party chair prior to that. She actually participated with our efforts in 2021 in Georgia. Prior to her being publicly named as Biden's nominee for the Interior, she had participated along with a couple of tribal leaders and Four Directions Executive Director Oj Siemens and Grassroots Director Donna Siemens, Lower Muskogee Creek Tribal Chairwoman, Principal Chief Vonnie McCormick participated in that basically Zoom teletown hall approach, but Deb Haaland participated there. And in fact, we used her messaging pretty aggressively in the direct mail that we had gotten to every Native American voter that had declared their race on the Georgia voter file. And so she was an important part of the motivation for Native American voters in Georgia. So the overall messaging, the most important one might just be the very first Native American cabinet secretary. And in fact, of the cabinet that oversees so many departments that are important to Native communities, certainly the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but also the outdoor lands, even outside of tribal lands in the West, the public lands that, let's be honest, folks, it was all Indian country, not so very many hundreds of years ago. And so that is also part of that. Being engaged mattered in 2020. It will continue to matter in 2022.
Do you find that the population of Native Americans are all very aware of Deb Haaland? Because I'm just so inspired by her pick. This was just groundbreaking for our nation. And I hope that it's well understood and respected among the Native Americans themselves. Do they get the power of what's happened here?
In a word, yes. No, there was such incredible pride. I'm a bit of a nerd for history of politics and whatnot. It clearly is akin to the Irish and Jack Kennedy in 1960. It's that kind of deep appreciation for what it means.
It's great. Wonderful.
That was my son, Ben, who's 7 years old, who photobombed us in the background there for a second. I wasn't even aware he was there until I just turned and he was on the camera. So that was Ben Cohen.
We all enjoy that.
You all saw that. I happen to notice him over here on my left. Kitty asked, what stops Native Americans who are registered from voting? Several things. One, there are restrictions put in their way. There are roadblocks. And that's what we try to alleviate. We try to disassemble the roadblocks. The roadblocks are misinformation is a big roadblock, number one. Disinformation and misinformation. This goes back to, there's more to just getting folks to vote than registering them to vote. You have to educate them as well. If natives think that they need a series of federal documents to vote, if they think they need to provide this type of photo ID and that they need to provide their shopping list from the supermarket, and then they need to commute 90 minutes each way to the voting place and risk being disenfranchised, those are things that discourage people from voting. If we let them know you need this and this form of ID, you do not necessarily need a photo ID with a street address on it, a PO box will do. Brett may want to touch on this. There was a very important case back in North Dakota in 2018, whereby that issue came up. Natives were disenfranchised in the midterm elections of 2018. A court case resulted because of the fact that a ruling was passed that you couldn't vote if you had a PO box on your ID. Most natives who live on reservations, let's face it, have PO boxes on their ID. This was the word Native American never appeared in the legislation, but it's disenfranchisement and voter suppression in broad daylight. And in early February of 20, this was overturned, and this past election, natives in that state with PO boxes on their ID were allowed to vote. So it took 16 months for that to be overturned, but it was. The wheels of justice occasionally, or usually I should say, work or turn very, very slowly. That's another thing we do. We advocate for the Native community over and above just registering people to vote. We help to finance expenses when it comes to lawsuits. We help put tribes in touch with the appropriate legal counsel, etc. But that's primarily what stopped people from voting. They don't want to be disenfranchised. They don't want to travel 3 hours each way, and they may not be educated to what it actually takes to vote. We try to take all those uncertainties out of it to make it easier and less daunting or intimidating, if you will, to vote. The message that worked in Georgia, Kitty's also asking, is look what natives did nationwide. Look what they did nationwide. They turned out to vote en masse. They turned out to vote in large numbers. We have an opportunity here. Large native population in Georgia. Their voices need to be heard. And that message resonated, and a great percentage turned out to vote. As I said, 73% of voting age registered natives in the state voted. Now we're going back to Georgia this year, financing permitting, of course, and we're going to try to register more folks and increase the education process as we move forward. Thank you for that question, Kate.
Well, and now might be a good time to tell them what you told me about your relationship that's forming with our friends, Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight.
This would be an excellent time. I'll turn that over to Brett because he's been working on that.
Okay. Hey, thank you. So a couple of weeks, actually 3 weeks back, OJ and myself joined Dr. Janine Abrams McLean and her sister, Stacey Abrams, to discuss voter engagement. Actually, Stacey on that call had pointed out that she was aware of Four Directions' work and had been for a while. And in fact, that was the reason that the documentary producers for All In, the documentary that she produced and starred in, that played, I think, like last September was its grand opening, if you will. They had reached out to Barb and Oj Siemens, and so pre-pandemic, Barb and Oj had actually flown to New York to sit down for taping and whatnot. OJ likes to joke that he thinks he deserves an Oscar for that performance and just hasn't gotten one yet. But they were in the All In documentary. The conversation with Stacey and her sister went incredibly well. And in fact, later today we'll be issuing a news release regarding our relationship with Fair Count, which of course Stacey Abrams also founded. And as we've been talking on the phone here, OJ and our Georgia liaison, Cherie Bryant, actually have been on the call with Laura rather, the chief executive for Fair Fight. We're looking to put some sort of a communique together there as well. In as much as, having an announcement's fine, it's to dig in and help work with Fair Fight and Fair Count for Native American voter engagement in Georgia, more regionally across the South, and of course, given Stacey Abrams' star power, to that extent across Indian country more broadly. But we thought it was the right thing to do, and we'd actually had dialogued with Fair Fight prior to airdropping into Georgia in mid-November last fall, and so that's the natural development of that. And in fact, Dr. McLean is going to be one of our speakers at an event June 25th in Washington, D.C. Lewis talked about working on issues ever since Donald Trump tweeted about Elizabeth Warren's husband should be wearing Indian garb at Bighorn or Wounded Knee. We've been working since then to strip the 20 medals of honor that were awarded to cavalry soldiers for the massacre at Wounded Knee on December 29th, 1890. We worked, and in 2019, on the anniversary of the Battle of Bighorn, which is June 25th, 1876, then Congresswoman Deb Haaland, a Republican congressman from California, and others, including Denny Heck, a congressman from Western Washington, and Sharice Davids, the other Native American candidate or Democratic candidate, or not candidate, but congresswoman, and the only other congresswoman of Native descent, along with Deb, in the Congress, introduced the Remove the Stain Act to get rid of those Wounded Knee medals. And that became one of the things. We got commitments from all those candidates that I mentioned at those presidential forums, and got commitments from President Biden and Vice President Harris to get those medals gone. Senator Warren has reintroduced that legislation this Congress. There's companion legislation in the House. This event on June 25th, a number of Black military officer organizations descending from the Buffalo Soldiers of the 1800s that fought for the United States, and sometimes on the other side of Native nations. So it's a coming together of sorts. They are coming together with a proclamation to support this Remove the Stain Act, to get rid of these medals of honor names from the Roll of Honor, and doing so in Washington, D.C. Weather permitting, it'll be at the Native American Veterans Memorial that's attached to the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. So that's one of the other things we're doing. But Stacey Abrams' sister will be one of our speakers at that event, and she's bringing up with her, of course, Principal Chief Vonnie McCormick of the Lower Muskogee Creek Tribe, and we'll have funded the effort to get half a dozen of the Wounded Knee descendants that accompanied us to Washington 2 years ago to roll out the legislation. They will be back in Washington on June 25th of this year. And that also includes a 101-year-old Army nurse from Normandy, from D-Day, Marcella LeBeau from the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation in South Dakota. She's alive and kicking still at 101. She was with us there 2 years ago. She will be with us again to announce this proclamation and to continue pushing the United States to right this grievous wrong from 130 years or so ago.
Excellent. I wanted to see if Lewis wanted to say anything about fundraising while he has our attention.
Yes, I muted myself temporarily because the lawnmowers went outside just now. They always find a way to make a noise. It's not the lawnmowers, it's the garbage truck. What I wanted to say is several things. Number one, we do, as Britt just indicated, we are far and away more than a one-trick pony. People do not understand that or realize that about voter registers. We don't just get folks registered to vote, not even close. Whether it's the Remove the Stain Act, whether it's events like that, whether it's helping to finance lawsuits or expenses related to lawsuits, and whether it's helping to publicize injustices that are being perpetrated on Native community. We do all those things while we help folks to vote, without question. There was an interesting question from Mary about have we looked at the potential of the Native American votes impact on the New York 01 House seat in 2022. It's a good question. That's a good question because I'm not far from there. I live in Nassau County, that's Suffolk County 01, and Lee Zeldin is the Republican incumbent there. The answer is it would take significant a funding increase, a bump in our funding to be able to go and do that. It would be money well spent if we're able to do so, but it would be confined to one particular locality, one particular House seat. And in general, we don't have that type of expendable capital to be able to do something like that. We would like to focus on a state more than a district, if you will. And although that would be a good use of funding and of capital, all things being equal, things are not equal, and capital has to be well allocated. Where, as I said before, I don't want to make this like a business, because it's not, but we have to get the biggest bang for the buck where we can have the most impact. It would be great to be involved in that race. We've talked about it. It's been looked at. If we can get an increase in funding, especially early on. Early stage funding at this point is essential. As Karen began to lead into the fact that I want to talk about fundraising. Early stage funding, the election is not for another 17 months. And if you ask Stacey Abrams or anyone who's involved in voter advocacy and voter get out the vote efforts, you can do a lot 30 to 60 days before an election. You can do a heck of a lot more a year to year and a half before an election because you have greater flexibility. You can zig, you can zag, you can pinpoint your spots, and you can do a lot more. Early funding, when it comes to getting out the vote efforts, is more important than late funding. Not that we can't use late funding. We were able to go to Georgia and register over 13,000 natives to vote in Georgia, a lot of whom turned out to vote. Having said that, at this stage of the game, where the election, extremely critical election, is in 17 months, funding that we could put together now to be able to hire and to put teams in place for the summer months and get the strategy laid out. Potentially, again, if we're able to raise significant funding, we could expand past the 4 states that I alluded to earlier: Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin. We could add states to that list where we feel the need is there and we can do some good. But funding has to be there before we'll go ahead and do that. NY01 is a seat that would qualify, but again, that's an individual seat. Mary, it's a good question, but it's not a larger basket, if you will. So it would take quite a bit of funding, additional funding for us to get there. But having said that, my message about fundraising is early funding with 17 months to go, especially, let me put it this way. The GOP didn't waste a day. They didn't waste an hour. They didn't like the results in November. They didn't like the results in January 5th. What day did they start working? January 6th. They started drafting bills, and they started putting together stuff, and they started working with friendly legislatures. And I'm often asked, what can we do to counter these voter registration suppression, these voter suppression and disenfranchisement efforts that are sweeping the country? What can we do to stop them, to prevent them, to overcome them? And the answer is simple. We can't stop them because what they're doing is completely legal. They're entitled to do exactly what they're doing. Florida, for instance, if the Florida legislature wants to draft anti-voter registration, anti-voter, unfriendly voter laws, and if there's a friendly governor that wants to sign those bills into law, they are within their rights to do so because the legislature was freely elected, as was the governor. What we can do is we could simply play a numbers game and overcome it. And what I mean by that is this. Are they going to succeed, whether it's in one of the states that's already signed bills into law like Florida or Texas or Arizona? Are they going to succeed in keeping people away from the polls? You bet they will, 100%. There's no question about that. Having said that, our job is to try to minimize that, number one, And if they can succeed in keeping X number of folks away from the polls in Arizona and in Florida and in Texas, and we can get X+2 newly registered folks, newly educated voters to the polls to offset what they are taking away, that's how you overcome the voter suppression problem. Not trying to stop them from doing what they legally can do because of a lot of reasons, gerrymandering, etc. We all know the reasons. They've got the legislatures. Let's face it. Did the Democratic Party do great this past election? No. We won the White House. Okay. Democrats won the White House. Democrats won the Senate, not by too much. Democrats lost seats in the House. State legislatures, not a good showing, not a pretty picture. Not a pretty picture at all. With that being the case, they have license to do what they're doing. If we can get enough folks registered, educated, and turned out to vote to offset the numbers that they're going to keep away, that's how we offset. Money is the issue. It continues to be the issue with any organization, specifically our organization. And with 17 months to go until the midterms, which are, as you all know, vitally important, helping us get our work done now with 17 months to go is a real bang for the buck. And whatever contributions we could see from this incredible group here, please know would be tremendously, tremendously appreciated.
Well, Louis, thank you so much. Brett, thank you so much from afar. You two are inspiring and with the good work you're doing. And I feel like the work that you're doing is taking America in the right direction. And you're looking for that reenfranchisement of people who have been disenfranchised for generations. And, it's something that we can all get our arms around and feel good about doing the right thing for the right reasons, which is what our organization tries to do. And so we have the information in the chat for anyone who is interested in giving to fourdirectionsvote.com. You can see the link in the chat. And I thank you again. Our time is up.
If I could just go here 1 second, I realized there were several questions that were put forward in the messaging in the chat that we did not get to. And I would like to be able to get to them. Brett and I would like to. We didn't omit them deliberately, just time ran out. And I'm picking and choosing because there were too many questions to answer as opposed to giving a yes or no answer. None of these good questions were yes or no answers. And to answer the question correctly took a little bit of time. But we did omit some, and that was inadvertent, and time obviously was the factor. Karen, if you'd like to work with Brett and I in terms of us getting answers to those questions, we'd be more than happy to do that, because questions that are asked should be questions that are answered, period.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. We will look into that. And I thank everyone for joining us today and look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. So thank you.
For putting
Thank you
this
so
together,
much.
Karen. I appreciate it tremendously. Thank you all very much for being here and for listening.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. You all take care and be well.